Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Leadership Trail Mix. Today, after a couple of episodes talking about quadrants, we are moving to another geometrical shape, circle. Not the circle of life, but I actually want to start talking about Scar. No, not Mufasa's brother, not Scarface, but an experiment I recently read about in a LinkedIn post by Sahil Bloom, who, by the way, shares a lot of very cool and thought-provoking content. The one I'm referring to today is about an experiment conducted by Dr. Robert Clerk, a Dartmouth psychologist, in 1980. Participants were undergrad students, and here I quote Sahil's post. Half the participants were told they would have a large scar painted prominently on their face by a makeup artist prior to engaging in a series of interviews. In reality, the scar they were shown in the mirror was removed prior to the interviews. But half the participants engaged in the interviews believing that they had a large scar in full view. In the fascinating results, the participants who believed they had the scar noted that the interviewers had treated them differently. They cited feelings of judgment, helplessness, and powerlessness in the situation. The participants who believed they had appeared normally did not express any such feelings. Simply believing they had a scar caused them to interact with the world differently and perceive slights that did not exist. And Sahil finished saying, when we attribute our own misses, failures, and challenges to factors outside our control, we give too much power to them. Alternatively, when we embrace accountability, when we take ownership of our situation and the actions and beliefs that are within our control, we take back that power. And here comes the last, and in my opinion, most powerful sentence. Instead of wasting energy on every obstacle in your way, focus on what you can control and how you can break through. Let me read it again. Instead of wasting energy on every obstacle in your way, focus on what you can control and how you can break through. What a perfect segue into the concepts of circle of concern, circle of influence, and circle of control. This concept was originally created by a psychologist called Kurt Lewis in the 1940s. He used the term circle of influence to describe how social forces shape a person's behaviors and attitudes. A few decades after that, Stephen Covey expanded the framework to include control and concern. While the names are very self-explanatory, I would love to spend a little time describing each of them before we start talking about the applicability of it in our lives as people leaders. Starting with the inner circle, the circle of control, as the name suggests, it's where the elements of our lives that we have power over reside. Things like how you respond to others, your beliefs, your thoughts, your self-talk. This is where we should spend most of our energy and time on. The second circle is the circle of influence, where the things your actions can affect the outcome are. Here we should think health, relationships, work environment, future, politics. Most of them are shared things. And lastly, the circle of concern, where we find the things we can't control or influence, things that our actions will have little to no impact on. Examples of things on this circle are the weather, death, the past. While there are some very radical and unrealistic expectations out there for how much energy we should invest in each circle, I think it is a very personal decision. Being realistic, how much time would you like to spend on the things you can control? What about the things you can influence? And the things you can only worry but do nothing about? How much time and energy would you like to spend on these things? And how is it looking today? Big chances are that there is an imbalance, and we are spending too much time and energy in the circle of concern, getting blindsided and paralyzed by it. That's part of being human. Sigmund Freud published a book back in 1930 called Civilization and Its Discontents, where, among many other things, he lists the three sources of discontent: the limitations of our own bodies, the physical pain and the mortality, the overwhelming power of nature, and the constraints imposed by social relations with other humans. My version of it has three words: loss of control. This is what I see in what Freud says, and also in our fixation in the circle of concern. Because we can't control, we fear, and therefore have to focus on it. Unfortunately, the reality is that, as dietitians say, you are what you eat. Well, I'll borrow that idea to say that we are what we think. We are what we focus on. And the good news is that we can control what we think. We can control what we focus on. Going from psychology to biology, I'd say that more than three rigid circles, one inside of the other, the circles of concern, influence, and control are more like a human cell, protected by a membrane that allows things to move in and out of it. So, something that we can influence today may become a concern tomorrow. Something that we could control yesterday, we will only be able to influence today. Things change. That's the one thing we know for sure, right? Things change. And here is where we'll get more practical and reflect on how we can approach this framework as people leaders. The first approach is probably a little obvious. We can talk about it with our teams. We can use it to keep our teams in check when all they can do is worry about the things they can't control by saying, I hear you. What can you control or exert influence on this situation? I get it. When we are in the thick of a situation, sometimes it's hard to look at the forest. All we see is the tree that we just hit and that got us a bleeding nose. Well, here's approach number 2. We as leaders can help by challenging the person's thought process, the story they are telling themselves. Is this really what's happening? What have you tried? What was the response? Is that really the case? Earlier this year, I attended a conference where this very inspiring leader, Rhonda Morris, who is the CHRO at Chevron, said something that really stuck with me. Most deadlines are self-imposed. Mic drop, right? Of course there are hard deadlines, but look at the things that you are currently working on. How many of these deadlines could be negotiated with no or little impact to the final product? Rhonda's words kind of stung me, if I'm being honest, because it made me responsible for the situation I so many times find myself in. My pain is a lot of times self-inflicted. I had no one else to blame. I was the one that had control to ask for an extension, to ask for the why, to ask if the person needed a 300 pages deck or a note on the back of a napkin. Yes, maybe the response would leave me in the same situation, but I chose not to be the protagonist and ask, so I'll never know. And going one step further, maybe their initial response would be no, but that doesn't have to prevent us from asking, can you help me understand why? And potentially finding a happy middle. I get it. Sometimes it's hard to say no, not now, or to ask why, especially when the person asking for something is someone we have a relationship with or someone who is hierarchically above us. We take all courage we can to approach them, and then they don't give us the answer we are looking for, and we leave the conversation feeling defeated and committed to never trying again. No, that does not need to be the case. We don't have to default to yes. We don't have to. Our responses and our choices are in our circle of control. Yes, there will be times when, as leaders, all we can do is ask, what can I do to help? Or in other words, what does support from me look like right now? That question actually leads us to the third and last approach. What is in your employee circle of concern that might be in your circle of influence or even in your circle of control? For example, if a team member says, I'm concerned I won't be able to attend this meeting. I've tried to move it, but they were not flexible. You can say, I'll step in for you. Or, let me escalate the topic and try to influence it. By doing so, you're taking an element out of your employee circle of concern and placing it in yours, not as a concern, but as something you can control or influence. After walking through these three approaches, you probably won't be surprised that our call to action for today can't be anything different from, can you pick one of these approaches and try it with the people you lead? You don't even need to use the control, influence, and concern language if you don't want to. Come up with your own framework if you want. The goal here is Make your employees be seen and acknowledge the situation they are currently in. Challenge your employee with questions to help them step out of a victim mindset into a protagonist one. And, if needed, offer help by leveraging your political capital, influence, or power. And as always, the invitation is still out there. If you have questions, comments, or just want to share your own experience trying one of these approaches out, just send me an email. Miguel@leadershiptrailmix.com. Thank you for listening. Take care and talk soon.